recently at the Australian Labor Party 50th National Conference, and it was tumultuous. We were there with our good friend Josh Burns MP, one of 3 Jewish Labor members of the Australian Parliament, who'll talk to us about what happened at conference and what all the noise and news has been about since then. Josh Burns, welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Adam, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Josh. Well, so much noise. Let's start at the very beginning. What happened at conference and how did events unfold and why have they become controversial?
Well, I think anyone who's been to an Australian Labor Party conference knows that it's 3 days of debate, of speeches, of people coming together from the party, from the trade union movement, from the political wing, from delegates from the city, from the regions, from all different walks of life. And in some ways, it's this sort of beautiful amalgamation of what our party and our movement is. And when you've got people from all different walks of life, you're naturally going to have lots of different views. And the difficulty that we have in the Labor Party is that we are a democratic party. We broadcast our conferences live. We invite the media in. We don't have closed-door conferences like the Liberal Party or the Greens have the most secretive conferences. It's like this closed-door sort of cabal where, it's so secretive and weird, but we don't take that approach. If you're a delegate, you get full rights to move things on the floor of conference. You have full rights to speak, and it's a jam-packed 3 days. We often run behind time because of how many people want to contribute to the different policy discussions. And in the Jewish community, ironically, there is this sort of small component of conference that obviously becomes a very big deal, where it's something that I obviously understand how deep and how important it is to so many people to get this right. And I think that context is important, is that the Labor Party conference is 3 days where we discuss health, education, IR, the economy, the vision for the future, what we're going to do on a whole range of different things. And then obviously on the third day is our foreign policy chapter. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, on the chapter, the history of the Labor Party has been that this has always been a really contentious and difficult thing to navigate. And it's often been one where people, especially in the Jewish community, find it really, a really often tense part of the conference. And I was thinking about, how do I navigate this with a couple of things in mind? One, I don't have the numbers. I'm in a part of the party where we are not the majority, and the majority of the floor would probably take a view that is different to what many in the Jewish community would want from the government. So that's the first thing.
Let me intervene. You're being very polite, and I know that you must. Let's be a little bit more blunt, if I may. I can be. The Labor Party has essentially 2 key factions, what we call the right of the party and the left of the party. And the left of the party is, as what's happened in social democratic parties around the world since October 7th, aligned itself more with the pro-Palestinian, or what I call the pro-Hamas cause. And the left have the majority of votes on the floor of conference. I want to be really clear here. Josh, you and I are both pro-Palestinian. We believe in 2 states, right? But we're not pro-Hamas for all of the correct, right, moral reasons that is. But the left wing of the party has aligned itself with this anti-Israel, in some elements, anti-Jewish componentry, and it has the majority on the floor. And politics is often about numbers, like most of what is. So there's navigation to be held about that. Have I sort of explained that clearly?
I mean, I would honestly frame it slightly different and say, I think the numbers point is correct. I think that across the party, you have people from all different walks of life, And some people care about this issue more than others. I mean, Paul Hamer is a Jewish MP in the state parliament. He's in the left. I know he finds all of this extremely difficult. And there are some people in different parts of the party who really wanted us to go further. And you saw that from one of my colleagues who made that quite public, which I'm sure we can talk about, and all people would have seen. And he's not in the left, he's in the right. But there are obviously components of the left that we saw in Victoria that put up motions at the recent state election that were really beyond, where sort of mainstream politics is up to. So I think the fair and important point to make is that, I don't mind if people disagree with me on this. Of course they should, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is I don't have the numbers, and I'm just the only currency I have, Adam, is my relationships with people in the party and my, the way I can navigate and work together with my colleagues. And that's the power that I have coming into these sorts of things.
Yeah, well said. So we walked into conference that for audience, there's a group called the National Policy Platform Committee, and they look to developing the platform over the course of time in 3 years between each conference. And they had agreed on a set of language, I understand this, tell me if I'm wrong, on a set of language around Middle East issues. And it was to retain from the previous platform language that Hamas is not a part of the solution to any long-term peace agreement, and that the Palestinian Authority, as the forerunner of a Palestinian state recognised by this Labor government, will need to maintain its commitments to reform and development as the Prime Minister had outlined when he recognised the state. We come into conference, and that language, those two things have been pulled out of what was proposed at conference, and people are really upset about it. Members inside the Labor Party were upset about it because Hamas cannot be part of any solution. It is a theological jihadist. It wants to kill everybody,
it's a terror organisation, and it's prescribed as such.
For one of the better
it's illegal to be a member of it.
It's worse than a terror organisation. So to pull that out of the platform, to recognise it for what it is, and to pull out the words of the Prime Minister about keeping the Palestinian Authority accountable, what happened and why did that happen?
So just to correct something slightly, is that National Policy Forum didn't take anything out from what it recommended to conference. What was recommended to conference was what the National Policy Forum agreed to. There's been lots of drafts and iterations before it got to what National Policy Forum put forward, but no, nothing was taken out coming into conference. What there was is, conference, and I made this point in my speech, and actually Basem, who I do want to talk about because he's a terrific person, right? And he's the member for Cornwall if anyone who doesn't know him, and he is such a good guy, and he's obviously the other person who spoke. Let's come to Basem in a second.
I just want to talk about that language around Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
So what the platform is, and this is a really important distinction. What the platform is the sort of policy high-level statements of the party, and it's not the details. It's not cabinet policy. It's not government policy. It's not the law of Australia. It's the high-level policy statement document of the Australian Labor Party. Now, there's no budgets in there. You don't put numbers in there. You don't put specifics of policy details. What is in the resolution that passed the conference is a clear condemnation of Hamas and the terrorism, and it as a terrorist organisation. It does not have some of the language that we used around no future role, and it doesn't have the specifics of our policy of the diplomatic process that would need, and the steps that would need to happen in order to expand our diplomatic relationship with the Palestinian Authority.
Yes.
But I guess I would say 2 points, which people are fine to criticise, right? I'm not here to pretend that everything was perfect. In fact, I said that in my speech as well. But there's also nothing in there that voids that. And the foreign minister reiterated those points throughout the week publicly in a media release. And that remains government policy. It's also the law of Australia that Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation. Nothing that happened in conference even calls for that to be reversed or undermined or takes away from that. It just was a high-level condemnation of Hamas. And I completely, you can criticize, and I think it's a fair argument if people want to say that it should have had more detail in there. And people I really respect have made that point. But it's not true to say that in any way it undermines what is government policy.
Yes.
And what is the Australian government policy and what is the law of Australia is that Hamas can have no future role. We have stated publicly that it is Australia's position that it needs to disarm, and that it is also the law before the weekend and after the weekend that Hamas is a terror organisation that you cannot be a member of, you cannot fundraise for, you cannot support in any way, shape or form. And anyone who wants to test that out will be met by the Australian Federal Police.
Got it. So, why did the language in the platform change then? So you've made the important point. As I asked that question, I realise that the words of the platform have some relevance, but not deep relevance in the sense that the law of the land is Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and that has not changed and will not change, and it won't change unless Hamas itself changes, and there's no opportunity for that at this stage in its current form. So why did the language change, and where did that come from? Where was the push for that, Josh? What's the underlying nuance here that we're not hearing?
Totally. And that is the really fascinating political question here, where ultimately, I tried to do my best to find the best outcome that we possibly could achieve. And people may disagree with me, and that's fair, but I want to give people the reassurance that I have, there are no red lines crossed. There is no deviation or calls for government to do anything that isn't existing government policy. And it's not everything, and I said so, and it's a compromise, and agreement's hard. It was what I thought the way through this. Ultimately, you've got people from the party, and when you've got the numbers on the floor that would have liked us to do different things and go further and all of these sorts of things, then you have to be pragmatic, you have to compromise. And the way I did that was I sat down with Basem, and we tried to find something where there was a form of words that clearly weren't, nothing we did was going to solve the Middle East. Nothing we did was going to bring peace. It was just a statement of the Australian Labor Party in Adelaide. And so we tried to find common ground and try and find things that at least both of us could live with, that didn't take away from the things that we've already spoken about, didn't change government policy, but also gave him something to also be able to stand and hold conference floor. Now, I've obviously had a bit of feedback from people, and I respect them, and I'll keep taking people's calls, and I'm running up today because I know how hard this is. But don't think for a second that Basem's also not getting the same sorts of calls on the other side of this whole issue, are saying that they think he should have gone further, and there was language that he didn't use and all that kind of stuff. So I'm saying that to paint this picture that actually, it's very rare that the Australian Labor Party comes together on such a difficult issue. And the story that I wanted to tell people was actually that agreement is never meant to be perfect. It's hard, right? It's really, really hard, Adam. And to wear and to stand in front of that is something that I don't take lightly. And I feel the hurt, and I feel the frustration, and I feel the worry of a lot of people, and so does Basem. But what we wanted to try and say is that this isn't perfect. This is compromise. This is a difficult thing where we're asking a Jewish person and a descendant of Palestinians to come together and trying to find a way through the largest political organization in our country and work out a way where he and I can show some form of unity, not because we think we're going to change the world, but because actually that's really important to try and do that. Yes. And so that's what I set out to do. And he, to give you a sense of who this guy is the night of Bondi, I got a call and it was him, it was Basem, and you could hear in his voice the pain that he felt for our people. And he didn't say to me, I just wanted to send my best wishes. He said to me, can I come with you to something? Can I come with you to a gathering of the Jewish community? And I said, mate, of course he can. And so the next night he came with me to Caulfield Hebrew congregation, which isn't an outpost of the Australian Labor Party.
Not by any means.
No, but it's and he fronted up and he stood in solidarity with our community. And I thought, wow, there is a person.
And to the credit of those who were there, and I was there too. There weren't boos to him. There weren't anything. I mean, sometimes we can, we can be a little bit erratic, but no, to the credit that it was all done with menschlichkeit, and he exhibits that.
He is a great person, and he is. And if anyone wants to see a really sort of unifying speech, you should go and watch his first speech, where he talks about his family journey and how they were displaced and from Kuwait and Iraq. He's a
decent man. And Josh, I want to say two things if I can. I was speaking to some of the delegates in the left, around this, and they asked my view of it. And there's a light side and a hard side. And, the light side is, I said, look, in May, June, I was in Israel visiting my children and grandchildren, and Iranian missiles were flying overhead. I was inside our safe room. My daughter and her children were in their shelter down the bottom of their flat stairwell. I said, I promise you, when those missiles were flying, I promise you, not for 1 second did I think, I wonder what the ALP platform was going to say about that. Not for us. And they all looked at me and they went, oh, that's a reality check on its relevance. Your point is that this is a document about intent, but it's not policy that drives the government. And I think that's really important, because the policy of the Australian Labor Party in the platform as well as in government is a two-state solution. We can talk about the viability and the veracity and all of that for as long as we can, and that's beautiful. But it wasn't the hill that we were going to die on. And it says something to us, which comes back to the signalling that you and Basem did. There's a view in many communities of what I call zero-sum game politics. You have to win on everything. But politics is not zero-sum. Politics is about finding compromise, finding increments, finding movement, finding where we can agree and moving on that. And when we can't agree, and understanding that, and finding ways in which we can better things, not radically, which is zero-sum game, but process-wise. And what was so important in what I think you and Basem did was to signal the most important thing the Jewish community and Australia needed to hear. We can disagree respectfully, without demonizing, without hating, without threatening each other, and most of all, us. You and I have been at previous Victorian conferences in the last few years since October 7, when they were beating down the doors. And Josh, I don't know about you, but I felt my life was threatened. And when they got up to Nick Dyrenforth and screamed at him as a Jew, this was a signal to the country that those days, I think, are over. That was my feel. That was my emotional take on that. How do you feel about that?
I think what Basem and I spoke about, Adam, was that you've got two people whose family who came to this country, refugees, migrants, and in 2 generations, they have two people, Jewish, Muslim, coming together and who have managed to become members of the federal parliament and representing the Australian Labor Party. And we both stood on stage and we both spoke about what this country means for us and our families. And we both spoke about our hopes for the future and how this motion is not meant to be everything for everyone or to solve the Middle East. It's actually just about the process of trying to come together. And when you've got two fathers who just want to see a future for their kids where they don't have to worry and to stand next to each other, it was significant that the conference saw what it means for Basem and I. And we said to us, this is not everything. This is compromise. This is hard. But if we can do it, surely the Australian Labor Party conference can too. And the response that people had was just overwhelming. And
it was a standing ovation, and the longest standing ovation at conference.
It was a great moment, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And I'm not here to pretend that everything was perfect, but I am here to say that I stood with my friend who comes from a completely different walk of life, but actually we have a lot of similarities. This country gave our family everything. We both believe in the institution of the Australian Labor Party, and we both are proud to represent our communities in the federal parliament. And we tried to do something that doesn't get done enough, which is to find common ground. And that means, if agreement was easy, it would be done all the time. But actually it means putting down the things that otherwise you would really be fighting over. And Basem actually said it best. We can choose to fight or we can choose to agree. And if we choose to agree, then that means the things that we would otherwise fight about have to be put to the side. And that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. But also find the place to do that, appropriately with menschlichkeit. For me, the theatre and signals that sent the Australian community, and especially I felt it very strongly to the Ed Husicks and the pro-Hamas part of Australia, that the days of vilifying Jewish Australians who support Israel, openly Zionist, are over.
I'll say this, right? Is like, Adam, I said in the speech that by coming together, what this actually says is that there's room in the party for both of us and for the communities that we love. And you can disagree, but actually what we need to see is the humanity. And you and I know that too often the humanity is taken away from the Jewish community, and it's taken away, and all of these sorts of things are attributed to us that are not who we are. But in that moment, people saw humanity and they saw dignity, and they didn't see the things that people have been fighting about. They saw two people who were just trying to come together and to bring a big political movement together. And that was important.
Josh Burns, thank you for your insight and understanding into what has happened, and we look forward to speaking to you again. All strength to you.
Azak very much. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Thank you.